Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fifth Bookstore Romance Day. And hello, young lovers, our spotlight on YA romance. Thank you all so much for being here. Closed captioning is enabled for those of you who want or need it. I would like to thank again everybody for being here. I hope that you will go out and support your local independent bookstore. We wouldn't be able to do this without their support, and they need your support. Now I am going to turn this over to John from the Poison Pen and let him take control. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. I'm Sean Charles from the Poison Pen, and I'm delighted to be here with you today with this dazzling Galaxy panel of authors. I'd like to briefly introduce them, but I'm also going to give them a chance to tell you a little bit about themselves. Our authors today include Sayantani, and I hope I got that right, Dasgupta, who is a New York Times bestselling author of a number of critically acclaimed books for young readers and teens. Her most recent book, YA book, is Rosewood, A Midsummer Meet Cute. When she is not writing for children and teens, she is a physician in her other life and teaches at Columbia University. Born and raised in New York, Cameron Garrett is the author of a number of YA novels, with her latest being Friday, I'm in Love. When she is not writing, Cameron explores the creative world of cinematography and has directed several short films. A resident of Australia, where it's approximately 1:30 a.m., we thank Sophia Gonzalez for being with us. She writes contemporary YA novels, her latest being Never Getting Back Together. When she is not writing, Sophie can be found ice skating, painting, and practicing the piano. Suzanne Park, was born and raised in Tennessee. She's the author of adult and YA novels, with her latest teen fiction title being The Christmas Clash. A comedian in her other life, Suzanne was also the winner of Seattle's Sierra Mist Comedy Competition, and I never knew that existed. After beginning his writing career with a Sharpie and some Starbucks pastry bags, Adam Sass has now authored several critically acclaimed YA novels, including his latest, The 99 Boyfriends of Micaiah Summers. When he is not writing, Adam co-hosts a podcast focusing on pop culture. And last but not least, Robbie Weber is a Florida-based writer who loves sunshine, summer, and strong-willed characters. I love the alliteration. He can normally be found as close to the ocean as possible with his dog Arthur and his novel and a novel from Reese's Book Club. His latest teen novel is just out. It's called I Like Me Better. I'd like to welcome all of our YA authors, and my first question for the panel is I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about yourself prior to becoming a published author. And why don't we start with Sayantani?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for attending. This is really delightful. So as you heard, I am a pediatrician by training, which means, you take care of the kind of bodily health, but also, the intellectual health of young people. In fact, when I was in practice, I don't see patients anymore. When I was in practice, I would do things, and this is common, among pediatricians, we would write prescriptions for reading, either for parents, like read to your child 20 minutes a day, and then give them an age-appropriate book. So, the intersection of kind of health and literature was always there. I then went on to teach something called narrative medicine, which I still do, which is, again, at the intersection of story and healing, and kind of recognizing how important story is to all of our kind of intellectual, physical, emotional health. And then I went on to start writing for young people, which I kind of stumbled into, didn't realize that it was ever going to happen, and then it did. And the way I explain all these careers to myself is that this is about caring for the imaginative health of young folks. So that's me.
That's great. Cameron, what can you tell us about yourself prior to becoming a published author?
My first book was published when I was 19. So before I was a published author, I was in high school. And yeah, I read a lot of YA in the school library. I think that was my main, and I was editor of our school newspaper, which had a 10-year winning streak of like the Long Island Student Journalist Awards until I was editor-in-chief. That was the year we lost, so I broke the 10-year streak. I think that's like my claim to fame before publishing.
That's amazing. Sophie, what about you?
So I studied psychology at uni, and while I was in my final year of uni, when I was 21, I got agented. And then I was kind of working as an author as well as a psychologist for a few years. And right at the tail end of my psych career, I was working with children. So I spent a year in a primary school and then quite a few years in a high school, working as a psychologist there while I published books. And then a couple of years ago, I became a full-time author. So yeah, I've always really enjoyed writing for and working with young people.
That's great. Suzanne, what about you?
So my previous life, I worked in marketing and advertising as my day job. I'm now a full-time writer, but while I was doing that, I was always moonlighting as a stand-up comic. But how I got into that is a long story. It would take up a whole hour. But what happened was when I graduated from college, I wanted to try humor writing. And the only thing I could think of as like sort of a way into that was stand-up comedy. But how I got into that was just a weird coincidence of meeting a comic. She invited me on to perform on a stage. And I told her no, and she didn't get the no. And the day before the show, she told me I had 5 minutes to prepare for the show the next day. And so I had 5 minutes to write. Actually, I had 24 hours to write a 5-minute set. And then I just invited a bunch of people I knew so I could pad the audience with people that would at least laugh at my jokes. And so that's how I started. But after a while, after doing it for 10 years, I realized that I didn't actually want to do stand-up comedy. I actually had been trying to be a humor writer the whole time. So I ended up taking a lot of writing classes. And through that, figured out what I didn't want to do, which was writing memoirs and writing scripts and such. And I ended up trying out novel writing on my own. And that's how I ended up where I am.
That's great. Adam, what is your origin story?
Well, as you so wonderfully introduced me, I was probably my longest job before I came into publishing was being a barista. So that was sort of my gig at like many different Starbucks and Barnes & Noble cafes, which serve Starbucks coffee. They are not Starbucks. They cannot take your gift card, as everyone unfortunately finds out. So that had been my thing for like many years, and I had been at slow stores, busy stores, and any time in between, I would just pull a lot of receipt paper or the pastry bags and just outline writing on the back of them. So that's really kind of how I got started doing that while I was being a barista. And then all of my barista horror stories went into the 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers, which is about a boy who goes into a love triangle between an artist and a barista. So it's very AU coffee shop lovers will enjoy, but it's definitely, the coffee shop stories are all pulled from real life. They're all very ugly horror stories, but some sweet ones as well, because I did enjoy myself from time to time there. It wasn't all bad, but yeah, that was probably my 200 jobs off and on, little just very gig economy guy over here. But barista was the most consistent relationship in my life, job-wise.
Great. Robbie, what about you?
Yeah, so I started out my career in fashion PR in New York, and then I moved home to Florida because New York is very expensive, as much as I love it. And so yeah, my love for New York does show through my books. There's a lot of mentions of New York in my third book, which I know we'll talk about later what's coming next, but it does take place in New York. So, still love New York, even though I get introduced as a Florida author and I cringe a little bit because Florida is, Florida. But yeah, I still work in PR marketing. I've worked like in-house agency, freestyle or freelance. I've done a bunch of different stuff with marketing and public relations, and I've always just written and in my free time wrote books. And then I think I was like 22 when I got the idea for my first book, If You Change Your Mind. I'd read a lot of YA and I realized I had a lot of feelings about exes coming back into your life and writing about that. And so yeah, I just kind of, you know, still use my free time to write and pretend that I'm a real author, just like all these people on the panel.
Well, you're not Pinocchio. You are a real author, Robbie.
I don't know. Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Adam has told us a little bit about his new book. Why don't we have you start, Robbie, and tell us about the book that's out that we're going to see.
Yes, I will show you because Adam showed you his and I gotta. So this is I Like Me Better. And it is about Zach Martin, who is the soccer star, and he's kind of finally coming into his own. He's popular now. He scored the winning goal at States. Sophie, I heard you talking about not watching the World Cup. I'm pretty sure you said, but I did like watch, even though it was terrible timing for me in Florida. So yeah, it's a soccer book, but it's also about marine science, which is kind of weird. And people are always like, how does that work? And it's because Zach, he takes the fall for a prank he didn't pull and does community service at a marine science center. And Chip is the head intern. And he's just heard about Zach as this like bad boy athlete who pulled this prank. And he's like the cool guy. So he doesn't really want to give him the time of day. And Zach is falling for Chip while also trying to do his community service. And there's a bunch of soccer team drama. And yeah, it's just like a fun beach read with a lot of random like dolphin and shark puns. And there's a shark costume even. Yeah, that's I Like Me Better.
That's great. Cameron, what can you tell us about your most recent book?
My most recent book is called Friday I'm in Love, and it's about a girl who is upset that she wasn't able to have a sweet 16, so she decides to have this really big coming out party where she is going to announce to like all her friends and family that she's gay. But she's having all these financial difficulties, and then there's a girl who moves into town and she gets distracted and she's trying to figure out whether or not she's going to be able to have this party after all in the end.
Sounds great. Suzanne, what is your most recent teen book?
That's The Christmas Clash. It came out actually October. And the story is about two teenagers, Chloe and Peter, and they work at two rival holiday businesses at the mall. And their parents have rival food court businesses. One's Korean and one is Chinese. And also at the mall. And they find out that the mall is going to be closed, and Chloe and Peter need to work together to save the mall from becoming condominiums.
Oh, no timely. Sayantani, what about you have a book that's just out, I believe.
Yeah, so Rosewood came out in March, actually.
Okay.
Or was it April? Either March or April. Now I'm having, amnesia, of course. It is, let me see if I can hold it properly. It is my second Jane Austen kind of adaptation. This is Sense and Sensibility meets Shakespeare with a healthy dose of Bridgerton in it. It is the story of two sisters grappling with the death of their father. The elder sister, as we firstborn immigrant daughters tend to be, is responsible and practical and, doing all the right things and giving up on her dreams of being an actress in order to be pre-law. And the younger sister, the Marianne Dashwood character, is kind of full of joie de vivre and kind of a little reckless, and convinces her older sister, or kind of strong arms her older sister into going to a summer acting camp, but it's actually Regency camp. And so while they're at Regency camp, they dress in Regency clothes and learn Regency dances and learn archery and that kind of thing. But there is a Bridgerton-like show, which is casting extras, multicultural extras, for its second season. And rumor has it that one of the principal actors may be among the campers looking for the woman he has the most chemistry with. And hijinks ensue, and romance is found, and it's kind of my love letter to all the high school theater kids. I think right before we came on, I was mentioning I speak really loudly because it's my high school theater training. with all the education I've had, my high school theater training has taken me the furthest. So it's kind of a love letter to all those super over the top, lovely, amazing high school theater kids that I found belonging with.
Wow, that's amazing. Sophie, what is your latest teen novel?
So my latest one came out in November and it's called Never Ever Getting Back Together. Yes, it was inspired by the Taylor Swift song. It's a queer novel about a girl called Maya whose cheating ex-boyfriend becomes famous. And he goes on a reality TV show in which he redates all of his exes to find the one that got away. And Maya agrees to go on the show to redate him in order to get revenge on him. But to do so, she has to team up with the girl that he cheated on her with. And it is sapphic, so you can kind of see where that one might be going.
My next question, I'll just throw out to the panel to those who wish to answer. What do you think are the key ingredients? What is necessary to make a truly great YA romance novel? And if no one answers, I'll call on you.
Timing.
Timing, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say Shivers, but Sophie took, I think Pining is close to Shivers. But also I think character growth, right? So my one girl who's the elder sister kind of learns how to be young, like learns how to, you know, believe in herself and in magic and give up control. And the one who isn't, you know, apparently isn't responsible, like learns how to take care of others. And that's kind of her. So I feel like maybe in all novels we need to have character growth, but I think in YA novels, you know, you're really learning deeply about yourself by virtue of the process of falling in love, hopefully.
I would add to that and say it's very basic, but stakes. So I've written 4 books, 2 are horror and 2 are romance. I'm very Gemini that way. And so whenever I kind of talk about the difference between hopping between horror and romance, because they literally go back and forth. It's like 1 and then 2 and 1 and then 2. But for me, the characters all across all genres feel like whatever they're dealing with is life and death. Just in the horror book, it literally so, and then the romance main characters are a little more like, you can calm down about that like a little bit, but that's, I think the stakes are the big thing, because it has to feel as, you know, and I've heard from folks who read my first book, which was horror, and then they came with me over to this romance book, which I was very grateful for, and a lot of them wrote back and they were like, this was just as suspenseful. I was just as stressed out reading this. Yeah, because it's because I think that's the other thing when you're talking about YA romance, these are teens, a lot of them are falling in love kind of for the first time, experiencing everything for the first time. My character, Micah Summers, is has never asked anyone out, and it's really, the whole book is really about that little gap of time between when, you know, when, especially when you're queer, and all of your romances have been inside your head. They've all been like, it's this, it's that. So this is a boy who is like grown up on YA romance. So he's bringing all of the book tropes to this real life boy, and then that kind of meets a lot of brick walls when the guy doesn't behave according to the rules that he's very, very used to, because it's that is the thing when you do make that leap, when you do start you know, being with somebody for the first time, you realize that like there's some of the tropes are like more like, oh my god, this is I'm living this story, but then there are certain things that maybe are a little more inconsistent, and it can create a lot of despair, because you're like, oh, I'm not like perfect like the people in my stories are, and that kind of sends him kind of going. And so that's where the stakes really come in for Mike, is that he is like, I am failing at this because my first time out the gate. Everyone else I know is in these just really fairy tale things, and everything's perfect, and they say the right things at the right time, and they you know, and you know, when there's the third act breakup, someone apologizes and then it's okay again, and then that moment doesn't happen, and then he's just like waiting for these sort of markers to happen. And so I think for me, stakes, I think with teens, it's just everything feels very real for the first time, and a lot of readers, if they're teens or not, sometimes there can be like a frustration of like, oh my God, I want to shake this kid, just do the right thing. But then you realize when you were a teen that there's like, everything's making so much noise. The relationship, the excitement is making so much noise in your head. And it's all so new that like, yeah, you're going to make like a ton of mistakes right away and you're going to not know everything right away. And that's okay. But I think the stakes have to be like literally horror movie level life and death.
Adam, I think that's so funny because I was going to piggyback off that. And then you said what I was going to say, which is like a lot of my main characters, actually all 4 of my main characters so far are gay 17-year-old or 18-year-old boys. And the reviews are constantly like, I want to shake this character because they make really bad decisions. And they're really like, I don't like when people say they're dumb. Actually, I will say that. You guys probably relate to that. Like they're 17, they're living in the moment and the stakes are high, but you know, yeah, they make bad choices. They're not dumb. But I think to that point, and it's especially important, I think, in YA versus adult, that the love interest is also has stakes that are just as high. And I think that like that is of course important in adult, but it's also a little bit more nuanced in adult, I think we find, because we formed our identity, at least, you know, to a certain extent, we formed our identity by the time we're adults. Whereas a teenager, you're like actively and from society, you know, like you're being molded and you are forming your identity. And so it's really important to me that like, as much as my main characters are messy, make mistakes, you know, make terrible choices, the love interest can't just be this perfect person that's going to come save them, because that's not interesting, that's not compelling, that's not real life, and that's not romantic, you know, like that's, you know, life isn't a fairy tale and there's no white horse, you know. Sophie, I'm sure you got that one with the Taylor Swift reference. But yeah, I think that the love interest, like, it's always important, adult or YA, but I think especially in YA, like, you have to show that growth. And I think it's also fun for me to show a different perspective of like a different kind of messy, because my main characters are the extroverted, like, make bad choices, a little louder, a little messier, and then the love interests are usually like these like STEM nerds who also make bad choices but never get called out on it. I think it's just interesting that like teens especially are so, like Adam said, everything is like 1,000,000%. So it's interesting, and you guys probably also relate to this, like reviews from adults, they say the things like, God, this main character is so annoying. I can't stand how they thought that this was a big deal. Whereas teens will leave a review and they're like, oh my God, I love this so much. The main character, like, I totally feel seen, all that stuff. And so, yeah, I would just say the love interests, like, not completing each other, or like, but just being the right puzzle piece, I think, in YA is very important.
That's interesting you say that. Do you all find it difficult to, like, you know, we're all adults, like, go back in sort of time? I know, Cameron, you have less time travel to do, but to go back in time and sort of make those sort of, very, sort of teenage decisions, because I think sometimes, and it's not to say adults never make mistakes, please.
We do.
Yes. And I think that's the other thing, is that people kind of come at this with like this like supreme logic, and maybe sometimes it's that, but I think it's really probably the intensity of the emotion, and maybe the intensity of the emotion is what is a little bit more measured as time goes on. But I don't know, do y'all find it like kind of difficult to like tap back into that, like every emotion is 1,000,000%, or is that just how you live in it and you're just like, yes?
I was kind of related to that, and the previous question was I think authenticity of angst, I think, is sort of one thing that I think of based on what everyone is saying, and also what I look for in any rom-com that I read, is, does it feel age appropriate? Does it feel situation appropriate? And for these characters. And I think that is one thing that I think can make the story move forward pretty well, if you know where the angst is placed and how heightened it needs to be. And when the timing of it, when it should show up on page. But my daughter just turned 13, and hearing her talk about her kind of current day, she talks about the cringe compilation in her head. Like everything, she thinks about stuff that happened to her in elementary school and middle school, and she replays these things. And so that, there are parts that are still the same, because I still do that, and I'm your mom. So it's not you don't have to go like that far back, because I think that stuff is still relatable. But I do think that, times have changed a bit, where what they think about might look differently in this day and age versus like when we were younger.
Absolutely.
I don't think I've matured as much as I'd like to have. I'm still very angsty and I'm still very dramatic, and my emotions are way too dialed up all the time. Like, yeah, I don't have to reach that far.
And my problem is the opposite, Adam, to Adam's question, which is because I started as a I still write middle grade fantasy. And so I started as a middle grade writer of novels where, yes, there's two princes and this demon slaying girl from Jersey. And the flirtation is like, will they touch hands by mistake or won't they? Like that was, there's some like, he's really cute, but like, that's about it. So when I wrote my first YA, which I had been wanting to write forever, it's called Debating Darcy. It's a high school speech and debate, BIPOC and queer Pride and Prejudice, as one does. My own teenagers were like, they read the manuscript and they were like, more kissing. They're like, why is there not enough kissing in this? And like, it's embarrassing to be a whole grown adult and have your teenagers be like, more kissing, mom. Is this a YA book or isn't it? And I will admit, I like the chapter I wrote after being humiliated by my teenagers is my favorite chapter. But so sometimes you need to get brought down, but it's not that I needed to get brought down from like adulthood. I needed to get brought up from middle grade. So teenagers, nothing like teenagers to keep you humble.
Did you have anything to add, Cameron?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of what to say, because it's like not like what Adam said, like it's not that far off for me. I still feel very much like a teenager, even though I'm like 23. I feel like I'm not an adult. And I think it's also just like different, I guess like cultural touchstones and like different, I guess like language almost, when I just think about like being on Twitter and like the circles I run in on Twitter, like the way people talk about like the summer I turned pretty, or like the way people talk about I'm trying to think of another, like even the shows that we watch, like I guess are a little different. And I think when I write, I'm like very influenced by those things, even if it's just like Wizards of Waverly Place or something. And I think it's kind of like I didn't really answer this question because I feel like it's almost cheating for me that I can reference these things in my work and the generation that's reading them is not so far off from me and they'll get it. I'm kind of nervous for when I'm like a little bit older. Like as I get old, I work in a bookstore and we were restocking the YA section and I was like, we need Anna and the French Kiss and we need like this top tier like 2011 YA books that I love, and no one buys them. And my manager was like, we're gonna like, maybe we should just stop letting you buy these books because the books you want, no one's reading. And a kid even said to me, like, these are old books, like, and I don't know what you're talking about. So once I get to the point where I'm too old for anything, I guess, too old for anything, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I haven't reached that point yet.
Oh, they'll tell you.
I'm already being told. I'm already being told that Divergent and Anna and the French Kiss are too old, so I have to stop.
They're not old, they're classic. That's what we say in our bookstore. So.
There we go.
My next question for you, I want to start off with a quote because I think it really says better what I wanted to say. And the quote is, one of the most important things YA romance novels can do is to show readers that everyone is lovable and worthy of romance, even when the rest of the world is saying otherwise. And I think especially now, it's always been important, but especially in the last couple of years, this is something YA romance novels do. Can each of you or any of you expand upon that or add to that particular statement?
Yeah, I think specifically as like a Black queer woman, like this is really depressing, but if you look at like studies of who's deemed most attractive or who's deemed most beautiful, Black women and Asian men are usually at the bottom. And I think it's really, really important to have these books where not just Black girls are seen as desirable, but like Black queer girls are seen as desirable is really important, because kids, not just kids, anyone who reads this are subconsciously taking in these messages. And the fact that a lot of people, like all of us in these panels, have been excluded from these narratives has shaped the way we view ourselves and shaped the way we view other people. So I think it's really important to see Black women, Black queer women, Black plus size women at the center of these stories, because it's still like we're still not seen as desirable. I think that's a really, really big deal for me. So many of my friends have said I never really experienced romance as a teen. I never really experienced romance now. I'm sort of ignored compared to my peers. And I feel like that's something that maybe Black women talk about a lot, but like it's a community discussion that doesn't get talked about a lot outside the community. And I know other communities have similar issues. So I think it's always really beautiful when we get these stories where we're at the center. And not to like talk too much, but I think that's also why when we have like retellings or like, because there's always like discourse about, we've seen this story before or whatever, but like, I think there is something to be said for like having a gay kid or like a Black girl or like a South Asian girl at the center of these stories that we've seen so many times before, but we've never really seen ourselves in. So that is important to me.
I think also to that, like, I'm going to use this to segue to Adam because I'm not going to speak for him, but I will say, I think Adam, you and I are kind of like, I got the little yin and yang on my shirt. I feel like we almost are like on two sides of a coin with how we write for queer teens. And I think like to Cameron's point, like the representation is what's so important. And like, I specifically write, like, what would I have wanted as a teen, and I remember reading like the silly books like The Click and Gossip Girl and things like that. And I remember being like, there's just like no like gay stuff that's like this, where it's like lighthearted or it's like funny or it's just, whatever it is. And then Morgan Madsen books and Jenny Han books. And I'm like, why, like, I love all these books, but like, why is there not just one with like a gay teen? Like, why does it have to be about coming out and stuff like that? And I think that the coming out stories are just as important, and the trauma stories are just as important. And I read those too. And I'm like, this, you need to have these, but I also want to be able to give, like, I want to be able to provide teens with the option, you're having a hard day, or like, you just want to go to the beach and you want to read like a fun rom-com where homophobia doesn't exist. Like, let me write that for you, because that's what I like. And then I think, like, Adam, I'm going to let you speak on the more other side.
Trauma. No, so 99 Boyfriends is not
no,
the
not
traumatic
99
book.
Boyfriends.
Yeah. So my debut, Surrender Your Sons, is about an ensemble of queer teens who it's really it's an escape adventure. They are escaping a conversion therapy camp. So we're dealing with very heavy topics. But
everybody should get that book, by the way. Sorry to interrupt, but just saying, everybody should read Surrender Your Sons. It's so good.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And Surrender Your Sons, this was something, and this actually made it very difficult to sell initially to a publisher. It took me many years to get it agented and then sold. It was a struggle, but like everybody kind of liked it, but everybody wasn't sure kind of what to do with it, because there was a lot of dark humor in it as well, and people were a little confused about, like, well, how does that really digest the humor and this really horrific situation? And I think I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of queers digest trauma through humor. I think that's how a lot of us, that's a lot of people do that. And that's a big queer culture thing, is finding ways to, like, because these kids are going through something just really, really, really horrific, and they have to like adapt very quickly to it. And, jokes and sort of letting the air out of the thing really helps. But to what you were saying though, Robbie, I think that's a big part of, to the larger question that was asked, is this is my mission personally. Every time I do a queer book, even though it's it's very important to me to have a large queer ensemble, because every time I do a book, I want to show queer readers, especially young queer readers, that there is no one way to be queer and to be in a queer relationship if that's something that you want. I think the more queer stories that we put out with different varieties, I think the better, because all of us are just living different lives. We're not, I mean, the more we have just the one or two things that are really, really big in queer stories, that can kind of, I worry that that makes, I worry that that slants a lot of the energy one way into kind of pure fantasy. And that's the reason why I wrote 99 Boyfriends, is I wanted to write this really cute and sweet romance book that was, however, you know, about incompatibility, because the thing that Micah is dealing with his multiple boyfriends is that, and that's something that I think a lot of queer people usually don't have the luxury of dealing with or taking into consideration when we date, if we want to date, is are we compatible with this person? Does somebody want to kind of take things slower? Is somebody having to deal with a lot more stuff? So Micah is dating somebody who has a lot of you know, he's had trauma in his past, and he has dated a lot more, and so there is sort of an incompatibility there. But because there's such a when you're young and queer, there's so few options of who is out and interested, and like is available, and you know, there's like your dating pool is smaller. And so really that's what my book is about, which is about, you know, how do you kind of, we operate in this predominantly heteronormative society when, you know, our dating pool is like super smaller, and but we're still expected to kind of be like, you know, want the same things and be super compatible emotionally and being super compatible sexually, if that's what we want. Like, and I think having that conversation in young queer books, and like, and Micah's mom talks to him about, she's a doctor, she talks to him about PrEP and all that, like once he has his first night over at his boyfriend's place. And so I wanted this just to be a very like relationship positive, sex positive sort of book, where if that was something that was what you wanted, that you had kind of that, you know, frame of reference, but also within the book show that not everybody's at that speed yet, or maybe ever will be, and that's okay. So I think when we're talking about like representation, like we just need way more books, way more different voices writing those books, and within that, within the books, not just having the one gay person.
Any other thoughts before we move on?
Well, with all the banning that's going on at the moment, the question being, you know, why is it important to show people that they're lovable? The people who are banning those books know that there's power behind representing people, showing people that they're lovable, showing people that they are important. Otherwise, they would not be trying so hard to shut that down. They want to keep marginalized people small, and books are one of the tools that we have to build people up and to center them. And that is exactly what these people don't want to see. And I think that that speaks for itself.
For sure. And one thing I wanted to add, now that you mentioned the banning, is something that I have noticed. We talked about my book, Surrender Your Sons, before. It's a very radical book. I'm frank, there's a lot of stuff that I'm frankly like shocked I got away with, but it's something where it has not shown up on a lot of ban lists. And I think a part of that is because the cover is very stealth and the title is very stealth. You don't really know what it is. It's something that like can be passed from, you know, librarian to reader very easily without, and I wanted to write something where, because it's about kids who are coming from this very intense evangelical religious background, I wanted a book that kids could potentially just read in their parents' living room, even if they're not out, or if they're newly out and maybe in an awkward way with them, and wouldn't be self-conscious, where 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers is like a purple pink book. Boyfriends, there's a lot of boys and cute boys on the cover, like, so it's just a lot of like, that would be kind of the opposite of the stealth cover. So I think, especially even when we're talking about titles and covers, I think it's important to kind of take that into consideration, that having books that are having that visibility, but there is also a great need for queer books that are stealth, that a kid who is not out yet or out but in a kind of uncomfortable situation, maybe at home, something that can maybe slip through a lot of people's radars and can be read in comfort, I think is equally important.
That's great. You all gave some really serious consideration and thought to that. My next question, Cameron touched upon a little bit, but it's for anyone who's listening in that might be working in a bookstore or a library that's not familiar with young adult romance novels. What would you tell them? These are my top 3 picks, the top 3 titles that I think you need to have to help YA romance readers. And why don't we start with Sophie?
One that comes to mind straight away is Imogen, obviously, by Becky Albertalli. That's one of the most recent YA rom-coms that I've read. It's super, super funny. It's romantic. It's really inventive plotline. It's got the kind of fake dating in there, sort of. Yeah, it's super fun. Another one that I've really enjoyed recently was Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. That one was really, really fun as well. You know, I wanted to say, Cameron, I actually gave Anna and the French Kiss to my little cousin a few weeks ago, and she just messaged me a couple of nights ago like, oh my God, I loved it. And so, you know, we're still getting those classics.
Classic.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I definitely think that it's good to have, you know, some new stuff and to still pay homage to the books that paved the way for us, right?
True. Sayantani, what about you?
Oh gosh. Of course, the moment anyone asks me about
Books.
I read a ton, and I read like 3 books and 5 books at the same
I've
time.
never read a
Of course,
book.
right. It's all
Read
all
it
out
and
of
it's
my brain.
in
Like,
one ear and
books?
out one ear. I really can't remember. Yeah, like you can't remember the book after you read it. It's
I
just
cannot
not how it
remember like
works.
a word right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass, because I was still in the we all deserve happily ever afters, you know, brain. And now I've completely blanked on, you know, any and all books. Books? What are books?
Sure, we'll go
Suzanne,
ahead
you
to
want to grab
Cameron.
it till my
Yeah.
brain gets back in gear?
I will, and I'm with you. Marginalized folks need happily ever afters, and I didn't say that before, but I firmly believe in that. And awkward nerds also deserve happily ever after, and marginalized awkward nerds especially. So, anyway, so I was going to actually rec Sayantani's book, Rosewood. So yes, any theater it's theater themed, so any theater geeks would love it. Any Austen and Shakespeare fans also would enjoy it. Gloria Chow, her latest is How to Wish Upon a Lantern, takes place during Lunar New Year. It incorporates Chinese culture and heartwarming traditions and wish granting. I just really found this lovely and magical, and it's just like any typical Gloria Chow book. It's very bingeable and readable. Maybe I like magical books now, but Julie Aby's book, Our Cursed Love, I think it's out, but that's set in modern and magical Tokyo. And I like this book because it has a coming of age element for both characters and also has romance. And I love books that blend the two. And then finally, I would say, I already did 3, but I'll add Jennifer Yen's book. It's called Artifacts of an Ex. It's not out yet. I think it comes out in November, but that one is funny because it has like a nod to LA and New York life. So if you've lived in both places, you kind of will appreciate her kind of comparing the 2 cities. It's about, you know, a breakup, and it has heartbreak, heartache, but it also has a heartfelt happily ever after in it. And I thought it was very, very well done.
That's great. We've got Cameron, maybe next.
Yeah, I really, really love She Gets the Girl by Rachel Lippincott and oh my God, Allison Derek, sorry. I think it's really, really romantic that they're married and they co-wrote this like rom-com together. And it also just reminds me of like 10 Things I Hate About You, like the really fun, like teen rom-coms that I think everyone or most of us love. I also really loved Chloe and the Kaishao Boys, which came out earlier this year. It's actually my staff pick at the bookstore that I work at. And it's about this girl who is from the Philippines and she wants to come to the US to like study film. And her dad, it's really, really sweet because her dad like doesn't talk to her about any of this. He's like, I'm sad you're going, but like won't tell her. So he just like sets up all these dates for her. And I think that's like a really like sweet way of not communicating with your child. But it's also like really romantic and it's just so funny. Like I was really, really surprised at how much I was laughing at it. And then I don't really know how to pronounce this author's name. I want to say Sierra, but I know that's not how you say it because she's Irish. But she wrote the Falling in Love montage and then Not My Problem. I love all of her books. And the Falling in Love montage is about like this girl who recreates a falling in love montage with this other girl. And then Not My Problem is about like this girl who fixes people's problems like at her school. And I just love that author, Sierra Smith, I don't know this. I'm so sorry. But I really love her books because I feel like the main characters are sort of prickly and they're dealing with things, but they're really sweet underneath. And there's always just like fun, like gay content. Like in Not My Problem, the main character's ringtone is Kristen Stewart saying, I'm so gay. And I just feel like that's the type of representation we need.
Robbie, what about you?
I would say Julian Winters is one of my go-to recs. And so I think Right Where I Left You is my favorite of his, but also Running with Lions was my intro to him, and it's a soccer book and I like reread it all the time. I love it so much. So those I would say Riley Weaver Needs a Date to the Debutante Ball.
I'm not coming back.
I was just gonna say anything by Jason June. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I know. That's what I was trying to pick one.
Yeah.
And then also If I See You Again Tomorrow by Robbie Couch is amazing. So yeah, I would say those three would be my top three.
Okay, I found my list in my phone.
Okay.
But that I like hadn't pulled up in time. So Jason June was on it. Elise Bryant is on it. I think one of her latest ones was what is it called? Reggie and Delilah's Year of Falling in Love. So that's really lovely. Of course, Leah Johnson's You Should See Me in a Crown is a perpetual favorite. And Suzanne Parks books, because the thing for me, like the calm is just as important as the rom for me when I'm looking at YA. And I tend to read YA rom-coms as opposed to serious romance, because to me, and again, as like a Jane Austen adapter and Jane Austen fan, to me, there's nothing more romantic and nothing more fiery than like the using sentences like swords and that like meeting of wits and sparks fly. And Suzanne does that very well.
Adam?
Yeah, so I am torn between my picks for sweet romance and tough romance. I'm just gonna blow through them super quickly. So I do have I Like Me Better by Robbie Bever, which I really loved. It is.
Well, I would have
like
shouted you out, Adam, if I had known we were gonna do that.
See, I was waiting for you, and then I was like, oh, he didn't tell me about my book, so I'm just gonna slide his away.
I got it behind me.
No, it's very fine. No, but I think for people who love like if you really love Julian Winters' Running with Lions, like people who love like kind of soccer, sports, gay YA, like this is absolutely, I Like Me Better is absolutely for you. I have a hat from Jason June's Debutante Society book, so I loved that. I loved Fate Dates and Mooncakes by Cher Lee. It's a Singaporean Chinese MM romance where they are making mooncakes together for this Mid-Autumn Festival. It's very very cafe romance. And then like my two picks for like the tougher ones, which were books I absolutely loved, and everybody should get this one. This is Why They Hate Us by Erin Estevez, which is about it's basically like a bi kid and just all the different like just a hard time he has dating, and it's just really it just says a lot of really cool stuff about dating and about mental health, and just kind of says it in this kind of really tough but very funny way, and just his voice is amazing. And I don't have the full book, but I do have the bound copy because I blurbed it. But The Long Run by James Ocker is amazing. That is another like tough guys who fall in love thing, and they are so rude, so nasty, they swear a lot, they are really mean kids, but they do fall in love, and I love them so much. So please pick up The Long Run.
Those are some wonderful suggestions. We're rapidly approaching our time out mark. So before we run out of time, I'd like each of you to tell us a little bit about what's coming next from you as an author and how readers can learn more about you, what social media platforms you're on. And why don't we start with you, Sophie?
So my next book is called The Perfect Guy Doesn't Exist. It's another sapphic rom-com about a girl who accidentally brings her fan fiction character to life, and kind of like the Pygmalion myth, and discovers that all of the things that are so romantic in books are a little bit less romantic when they happen in real life. And she has to team up with her ex-best friend to try and figure out how to get rid of this leading man that she invented. You can find me at S. Gonzalez Author on, what do we call it now? X? You can find me on X. If you have to, or Instagram, preferably, and TikTok.
You forgot Threads, Sophie.
Yeah, I've been using Threads a bit. I think I've made a thread or two in my time.
Ayantani, what about you? What's next?
So I am actually in the middle of a new, slightly younger middle grade series called The Secrets of the Sky, which is an eco fantasy in which boy-girl twins and their flying horse friends and their rainbow-winged flying horse dog fly across the multiverse and solve like environmentally inspired adventures. So like missing bees, and the mermaids can't live in the water because because of acid rain and that kind of thing. So I'm very much in a not YA like headspace with my next few books coming out. Although in answer to one of the questions in the chat, what draws me to middle grade fantasy is the same thing that draws me to YA romance, which is I feel like we are in probably in any genre you can name, but certainly in those two genres for me, imagining forward a world that we want to live in, right? A world in which we are all, as we were talking about with one of the earlier questions, in which we are all kind of centered and valued and loved and desirable and powerful, right? And so for me, I find that in my middle grade fantasy voice and in my YA rom-com voice. And so in terms of coming up romances, I am working on 2 potential manuscripts. I was working on a Northanger Abbey adaptation for a while, which is such a weird Jane Austen book. And it's like full of Gothic romance and this girl who gets swept away by Gothic romance. And then I got distracted, which is a very me problem. And I started writing an Emma, like a snarky main character voice. And now I'm like halfway through these 2 manuscripts and need to figure out like which one to go forward with. But eco fantasy middle grade coming out and trying to figure out which Jane Austen to adapt next.
Social media.
Oh, Sayantani16 on Twitter, X, whatever it is. Sayantani Dasgupta Books on Insta and on TikTok.
Great. Cameron?
I just sold a middle grade fantasy thing. It's kind of fantasy. So I feel really similar to Satyani. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing though. Like I'm not really, I don't really have a handle on it, but I think that's the fun part of not knowing where I'm going with it and not knowing like all of the steps, if that makes sense. But I'm really excited, and I don't know what I'm writing next for YA, but that's also really fun. And you can find me on Twitter at Dancing of Pens and on Instagram at Cameron G. Writes.
Okay. Suzanne?
So I write YA and adult, and next year I have an adult coming out, an adult book coming out in April of 2024. It's called One Last Word, and it's loosely inspired by To All the Boys I've Loved Before, even though it's adult. And it's about a programmer. Actually, she's a app developer. Her name is Sarah Che, and she develops an app that lets you send your last words to whoever you want when you pass away. And she loads up a bunch of prototype emails, messages to people in her life, and then it accidentally gets sent out, and chaos ensues. So it has been it was a lot of fun to write, raise the stakes pretty high. So there's a lot at stake, from trying to get the app funded to then dealing with the aftermath of all these messages that were sent to people that she regrets sending them to.
That's great. Adam, what about you?
So 99 Boyfriends just dropped in paperback this last week, and my upcoming next month I'm putting out Your Lonely Nights Are Over, which is a teen slasher that is Scream meets Mean Girls, and I'm very, very excited about that. However, my next romance is going to be next summer, which comes out from Penguin Teen in July, and it is called Cursed Boys and Broken Hearts. It is another book in the world of 99 Boyfriends. It is not a sequel, but it's kind of in that world. Where 99 Boyfriends is a Cinderella remix, but from the prince's point of view. So with this one, I switched up the fairy tale remix. We were doing the modern retelling, and Cursed Boys and Broken Hearts is a Beauty and the Beast remix from the Beast's point of view. And that one is probably one of my favorite books I've ever really written. It was a joy to write, but this one was also my most personal. It follows this boy, Grant, who has just been dumped, and it's a year after his breakup and he's still not over it. And a lot of it is about depression and feeling that kind of self-hate when you feel cursed like that, where you are losing relationship after relationship and opportunity after opportunity. So he has this sort of beast-like self-hate, and so he leaves his home and he goes and stays with his aunt in the country, at her bed and breakfast and winery, and finds that it's this old summer house that he used to stay at when he was young, and he hasn't been there since he was 13 because his grandmother who ran it passed away. And at the same time, that same week, he had a major falling out with his childhood best friend, who was a local in town, whom he was in love with. And so that boy broke his heart. He was the first one to really begin his curse. So he hasn't been back to this house in 5 years, but now he's about to spend the summer there. He finds the house is in complete shambles, and his aunt is basically saying, like, can you please help me get this house back together again, or we're going to lose it. We're going to lose our family home. And so he has to work the whole summer with this gardener that she's hired to get the place up and running again. And he discovers that the gardener is his childhood best friend, all grown up. And it's an enemies to lovers kind of hate fest, I call it. So they are very vicious to each other, but the sparks do fly, and it is everything Beauty and the Beast lovers can want out of something, and that comes out in July. And you can find me on all socials, even I'm calling it Twitter. I'm not saying that other thing. You can find me at the Adam Sass on all socials. I'm probably most active, unfortunately, on Twitter, but I'm also on Instagram a lot.
Robbie, what about you? You've just had a book come out. Can you tell us what's next?
Yes. So my third book, What Is This Feeling, which is a Wicked reference, comes out next year. And it is another extroverted, messy, gay main character, but my most dramatic yet, because he is the theater star. And it takes place right before graduation. The seniors in the drama club always have a trip to New York City, and there is a scavenger hunt every year. And this year, the prize is pretty wild. It's the drama teacher has tickets to an after party to a Broadway show where essentially this mega pop star turned Broadway star is going to be there, and it's the main character, Teddy's idol. So he's just excited to go to New York and do the scavenger hunt with his best friend and meet this pop star. And of course, his best friend gets in trouble. She can't go the day before, and he gets stuck rooming with this like loner, kind of stoic guy from Tech, Sebastian, who has an attitude. It's very grump sunshine. And so he's got to drag Sebastian along to do the scavenger hunt so he can try to win. And of course, you can kind of guess where things might go. So that's next year. And I am Robbie Reeds on all social except TikTok. It's Robbie.Reeds because someone with 2 followers stole Robbie Reeds, and they will not answer my messages. So yeah, Robbie Reeds everywhere. And yeah, thank you guys so much for having me today.
I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today. Never have 60 minutes gone by so quickly. We are very fortunate to have had such thoughtful, entertaining, informative answers from our panel of authors. I'd like to thank them for joining us and for writing such wonderful books. I'd like to thank those tuning in for joining us for today's panel for Romance Bookstore Day.
Thanks all for having us. Thank you.
Thank
you
you
so
for having
much.
us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And I'm waiting for Billy to